Hi, Rob.
Good evening. I'd like to call this Monday, March 2nd meeting of the Water and Sewer Bipartisan Committee meeting to order. Roll call, I'm Michelle McHugh.
Dan Cochiola.
Adam Simonson.
Joe Chabot. Jeff Cheney.
Thank you. Do we have any public participation today?
No.
Okay. For my fellow committee members, I'd like to address something that was brought to my attention. There has been some confusion, some on my part, about the actual recording and posting of these town meetings, and it's been brought up both to Dan and myself. The meetings are being recorded, and they will be posted. However, there is no deliberate attempt to block information from the public and to not be transparent. And that comment did come up on a recent discussion. I did reach out to Mark Ramo, our town manager, and asked him for his direction, as IT does report to him, as does Lauren and Lisa and Susie. Let's see, and this is the response from Mr. Ramo. At no time have I communicated a directive to any staff member, nor would I ever instruct staff to withhold or conceal information. For internal context only, the issue of posting meeting videos has been a recurring operational challenge involving the White Collar Union. While IT is responsible for posting recordings, backlog issues have occurred. Administrative staff have declined responsibility as the task falls within IT's technical scope. Mark is close to resolving this matter and does not intend to undermine the progress made toward a workable solution. IT is working today to post previously recorded meetings, and they are all now posted. They are also investigating why the Finance Subcommittee meeting did not produce a recording with audio. So that was at the last town council meeting. The Finance Subcommittee did not have video. IT believes the file may have been corrupted during recording, but this is still under review. If recovery is possible, the meeting will be posted in full or in whatever form is available. Tonight's bipartisan meeting will be recorded and posted at a later date, consistent with the direction provided at the outset of the meetings. Tonight's town council meeting will be conducted via Zoom with both audio and video. There has been no change to the town's policy regarding the recording or posting of meetings. Does that clear it up? Does anyone on this committee have any questions?
No, not at all. Just through the chair. I'm grateful to the community for bringing this to our attention, because I think in the day-to-day operating of doing the committee work, it gets lost about whether or not that video got uploaded or whether that one didn't get uploaded. And so by bringing it to our attention, we're able to look into it and figure out what happened. And so I'm grateful that we were able to solve that problem.
As am I, and frankly, I do not go back and look at our videos because we're here.
Yep.
So this is good, so they should all be posted. There may be a little bit of a delay, but rest assured they will be posted. Okay, last we left, we had come up with several recommendations, if you will. And I am going to, okay, here we go. Once again, the charge of this committee to recommend safeguards that will help prevent situations from arising in the future, to recommend policies and/or procedures to ensure the public remains informed, and to examine the business relationship between the town council and the Water and Sewer Authority, and recommend any appropriate changes. So our last meeting, we had suggested that there be a litigation risk management policy, which Dan Coach
Yeah, absolutely. So, and obviously I went with 10 fonts, so I need my readers. So, adopt a litigation risk management policy. The purpose, to establish a formal litigation risk management policy, providing the town council with structured oversight, documented legal analysis, and defined decision gates for all high-stakes municipal litigation. This policy transitions the town from informal, verbal updates to a documented, fiduciary-first governance model. Pillar number 1, total exposure forecast, the true cost standard. The policy replaces verbal general updates with a mandatory comprehensive financial assessment. So there's a standard. At every reporting threshold, the town attorney must provide a total exposure forecast. Within the structure, a requirement of an assessment must include the base judgment or claim, plus the calculated impact, post-judgment interest, statutory penalties, projected defense costs through the end of the next phase. Mitigation and recommendations. The forecast must be explicitly include any other mitigation strategies, like steps to limit exposure, and it must include the council's recommendation, right? Formal written recommendation to settle, to appeal, to proceed, include the legal rationale, and the cost of loss versus the cost of settlement. What we're asking is for our attorney to say, hey, listen, this is a 70-30, and this is why I think this is, right? Or this is a 50-50, and this is why I think this is. And we want that down in writing. A total exposure forecast. Pillar 2, spend-driven reporting. Cost threshold. Oversight is triggered by the volume of taxpayer funds committed, ensuring the council is alerted based on the fiscal impact. So in this pillar, the standard is formal reporting and strategy triggered when a cumulative legal threshold is met by a predefined number. You know, for example, a tier 1, $25,000, initial case assessment, right? Triggers a written summary of the merits and initial exposure forecast. Tier 2, $75,000, milestone review. Hey, are we still happy with moving forward with this? Triggers a deep dive into discovery findings. Tier 3, $150,000, escalation threshold, requires a formal presentation to the council in executive session regarding the long-term budgetary impacts. Tier 4, anything $250,000 plus, critical risk category, triggers a mandatory alternative dispute resolution. And this is key. If we get to those kinds of numbers, we have to be looking at alternative dispute resolutions. Pillar number 3, strategic merits assessment. Risk disclosure. All right, a qualitative risk assessment. No major litigation phase. Specifically, the decision to file a litigation or an appeal may occur without this formal memo. The requirement, counsel must provide the confidence level in key defense. All right, narrative ranking, high, moderate, low, of the town's primary legal defense, and adverse outcome factors. Specific list of factors that could lead to a loss, like hostile venue. I've heard people come and sit before us and say, geez, if our case wasn't held in the Watertown court, we would have done better. Well, then that's a hostile venue that maybe we should have been cognizant of before moving forward. Unfavorable witness, unsettled law. The appeal risk statement. For appeals, a written evaluation of why the trial court's decision is likely or unlikely to be overturned based on the standard of review. And then finally, pillar 4, accountability and enforcement. To ensure this policy is operationalized and not merely a guideline, it shall include the following. Contractual integration. The policy shall be incorporated in all outside counsel retainer agreements. Compliance is a condition of payment. Conditional authorization. Authorization to proceed to the next litigation phase, as outlined there in pillar 1, right? Is contingent upon delivery of the written litigation memorandum. Administrative compliance. Compliance with these guardrails is established as a core performance metric for the town manager's annual review. So there's exemplar policies that I was able to pull from like towns. Hermosa Beach, California, a town of 18,000, has policies similar to the ones that we wrote out here. Monroe, North Carolina, again, Travis County, Texas, and those are towns similar in size. Fresno, California, a much bigger city, has similar guardrails, and so it can be done on for a city of a larger scale. It can also be done for towns as small as ours. I think I propose that we consider putting this in our recommendations to the town council, a litigation risk management policy that allows us to have guardrails around what we do with litigation. Questions?
Discussion.
I think this is well done. I think you've covered a lot there, and I think this is definitely something that we have to include in our recommendation to the town council. I can't think of course, my limited knowledge in this particular arena, but it sounds like all the areas are covered from what we just went through. I don't know, Adam or Jeff, if there's any.
Yeah, I mean, it's consistent with this was one of our kind of recommendations we
Right.
discussed. I think it's pretty, fairly spot on. Two thoughts, right? One, we're gonna provide recommendations to the council. The council's gonna beat these things up and fine tune, et cetera, et cetera. I think the one piece this probably needs a big chunk of like the outcome of this, right? The sort of the reporting outcomes of this. Most of that's going to be continue to be privileged while it's pending litigation, right? You're not going to. This isn't going to become a public document. Certainly, at least initially, Bob, because for all the reasons you don't discuss, litigated matters in a public setting. So I think there probably needs to be a piece of this though that ties out to what does get discussed publicly. Meaning like, and maybe it ties back to some of the executive session pieces, but it says, hey, we underwent this step within the litigation management policy during the executive session, right? Something along those lines. Just make those rules kind of clear to folks so that we get away from one-line executive session summaries that say pending litigation.
To make sure I understand what you're saying is have a component written into this that gives the transparency that the town's looking for to the degree we can during.
Yeah, I think just make it, yeah, exactly. Give a good blueprint on this so that everybody's on the same page in terms of what can be talked about publicly versus an executive session.
Okay, we originally talked about something I don't see in here, and that's having an independent legal review trigger, where we kind of get a second opinion. If,
That's a good call.
yeah, I think in high-risk cases, we're gonna need a second opinion. And then, we may wanna consider, a supermajority vote for high exposure litigation. I think if it gets over a certain limit, it will require a broader agreement rather than a narrow one.
So are you saying like that $250,000 tier forward threshold might be a place where you have to go supermajority? Is
I
that
think
kind
so.
of your thought?
I would think so, yeah.
Yeah.
And I also think we should have a reserve planning requirement, to evaluate how, the town would absorb an adverse judgment.
For my own edification, because I don't understand what a supermajority vote is compared to a regular vote, what's the difference between the two?
Usually like a 60% or 2/3
Okay.
majority.
So that's
files a frivolous $1 million lawsuit against the town. You're right, and just making sure that we're not inordinately setting up some sort of large reserve that's only gonna come out of the tax base as a result of doing that, right? But I think your point is dead on. It's just the details up to what point you would have to start really thinking about establishing that, right?
Well, that would be for the town council to determine, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this is just reporting how we would do this,
Yeah.
and then it's up to town council to determine, you know, what levers
the
could be
numbers
pulled to
are.
make that happen.
Right,
If,
so-
if needed.
Yeah, no, and I would think, the existing, or the town's attorneys could provide some good input on that as well too. But I wouldn't wanna inadvertently create some statute that now suddenly says, oh, well, we need a big tax raise because we have this reserve policy that we put in place on something that,
I mean, really the point of it is to think about this stuff.
Yeah.
And not miss it.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I want to make sure as we provide these recommendations, and I think the risk management strategy that Dan came up with is framing that out. We don't want to just say, okay, here's our recommendation, now go figure it out.
Right.
Because that's not fair either, and that's going to tie town manager's hands and department heads' hands. So I like having some sort of framework around that.
And I think I'm really comfortable with having written the original draft and with this feedback. If someone else wants to take a crack at the second draft, integrating the feedback, all right? In that way there, I'm not trying to understand your feedback and integrate it into my piece, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
And it's probably gonna be a truer version of what you're trying to say, Jeff, or Adam, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's,
Yeah.
are you both willing to incorporate your thoughts into this existing framework?
I would love nothing more.
I bet, I bet. By 8 AM tomorrow? Okay, does that, for now, handle our litigation risk management policy?
Yeah.
Think so. Okay, our second was a WSA risk management policy. And I believe they are working on one, I believe Mark Ramo is working on one with them. So, we can certainly, I can try and get my hands on that and we can discuss that next week unless you would like to recreate it.
No, I think if they're working on it, that's probably great.
And I think it should also work in parallel with
With
the town.
you're right, with the other,
Right.
agree. Our, next recommendation was on.
I also just
Oh,
really
go ahead.
quickly, I had some thoughts about that as well.
Sure.
Just because there's such a divide between the town council and the WSA,
Mm-hmm.
I think as part of that risk governance, there should be a little additional oversight where the WSA should formally present financial performance and exposure to the town at least twice a year.
I agree. I think it probably should be more frequently until we get through the, rest of this year anyway. People are very concerned about, rates and where we stand. I think that's a great idea. Our next was, budget forecasting should be done beyond the current budget year. I know that, we were looking to establish a capital budget that would go out, but perhaps forecasting, 3 to 5 years?
So this is what's interesting.
Yeah.
I reviewed the charter, and right now, a 5-year capital program is required. So it doesn't sound like, at least from what I'm hearing, that that's being followed, but that's in the charter. So we actually already have that in place.
Okay. But that's capital.
Right.
Yeah, I don't mind, Michelle, I can take that as a takeaway from this.
suggested more than just a mechanism, but recommending what pieces of information should be highlighted for attention to the public.
That's correct.
So we talked about emails, we talked about podcasts, we talked about printed paper. Dan came up with an idea to have a newsletter, as the Town Times is no longer, at least in print. Do you want to
Yeah, I'll share.
share?
All right. So, and Mary Ann Rosa, in her testimony, on the phone during our last meeting, said something that I had been thinking for the last few months, since the Town Times closed down, which is, we're in desperate need of, a unifying communication platform in town, and something written, something that people can have on their kitchen tables and their countertops. That's missing. And so after hearing her a couple weeks ago, I took a deep dive and tried to look at what it would take to do a publicly funded newsletter. And it's not as crazy as I would have thought. And there are some exemplars out there. There's actually one in Connecticut that does it. And so, without reading through the 11 pages that I wrote, I think, or double space, so 6 single, but I think we can do something monthly that's 8 pages long, and covers town meetings, hearings, votes, what's coming, what's happened, meeting notes, recaps, some of the great things that our community already does, but in a more formal sense, department updates, public safety information, school and community notices. Heck, let's get our kids' pictures in the paper again, right, on the sports fields. Senior programs, services, boards, commissions, vacancies, how to apply to those positions, how residents can participate in what's happening publicly, publish submission, deadlines to put information into the newsletter, and also information that's going on in the region. And so, if we were to do this, we could do it for under $200,000 a year, and that's a chunk of change. It works out to about $2 a resident. If we only took it out of the general fund. Right. But there's other ways, which is really interesting. And when I look at these other models, Avon, Connecticut does a quarterly. Lake Oswego, Oregon does a monthly. Firestone, Colorado does a monthly. When I look at these other models, they're able to do it through braided funding. And what I mean by braided funding is they're using cost offsets. There's corporate banner programs, right? They have founding member programs. They have sustaining member programs. They have, and I'm reading as I'm going here, but they have, they could have a small subscription fee if they want to, right? As cost offsets. And put it in play so that we could make it available to every resident. If you want home delivery, that could be one layer of service. We could also have outside of Adams and outside of Stop and Shop and outside of our supermarkets, places where people can go and grab the paper, free of charge and not delivery. In other words, we could have a town-wide communication platform that the people who aren't online have access to. And the funding gets us pretty darn close to the number to do it. And so, without going too deep into detail, as I'm talking from here, I think it's something worth sharing and letting people read and digest and think about and discuss.
Thoughts?
This would be a town run?
That's a suggestion.
My thought is, and again, I mean, it's a tight budget year, as I said to you, $200,000, and I don't think that number is high enough to recreate a 10 times. I think before we get to that point, we should actually ask the townspeople, is this something you would take advantage of? I mean, a lot of the things you recommended are already online, yes, and those of us who have internet access can get to them. I think before we put all of this extra work, which it would be a fair amount on the town, we should find out if that's something that, if that's how people wanna get their information. Maybe 10 people want it that way, maybe 6,000, I don't know. But I think before we jump off that bridge, perhaps we should ask.
I think that's reasonable.
I don't know how we ask,
No.
but I think we should ask. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't.
I tend not to be cynical by nature.
Right.
But, I just, a town run or state run news kind of outlet to me just, I don't know, there's just something about it that doesn't seem like it would work long-term, and if it did, it would be could be corrupted easily.
One of the things that I wrote in yeah, so that's, and everyone I've spoken to, my wife included, raised this question, right?
Yeah.
And it's a good one. I thought the governance structure was the most important piece. And, how we have the WSA, the planning and zoning, boards that the town council oversees. If the publicly funded newsletter was run by a board, and that board was nonpartisan, if it was equal parts Republican and Democrat, right, appointed, so that there was no majority party control. And the person who ran the newsletter was answerable to that nonpartisan board, and that nonpartisan board was answerable to the town council. That could conceivably take away, right, that structure. But again, it's layered, and it's not simple. But that was where my thought process was. And again, yeah.
I just wanna keep us in the scope of what we're trying to do. So recommendation to do something like that makes sense. How that would happen, I don't know that we can vet that out right now. Not only that, but, so the rates are set with the WSA and even our property taxes. I think this is a tough conversation to have, and it's more in the town council than it is for our scope. So I'm just trying to keep us in there.
Yeah, so we have to make the recommendation to how to disseminate information to the town.
Right.
So, I don't know, I mean, last thing I'll say is I think there's a reason why papers like the Town Times are going out of business and stuff, because the way we get communication, the way we get information has changed drastically. And so, I don't know, but I think we have to put the ball in their court and say, this is something that the town clearly wants to know. They wanna know as much information as possible. How we get that to them, something you have to figure out. I guess, I don't know if we can make that recommendation, if that's part of our broad,
Well, what we can say is that, the charter on several specific areas says it's required to be posted in the town paper.
we don't have to.
Right. So obviously the charter needs to be revised for that. But there does definitely need to be a mechanism, but, I don't know what that is right now.
Maybe we get a Facebook post out there, somebody to restart the Town Times from the public sector.
Yeah, I think there's broad agreement
Yeah.
that communication needs to, I'll use the word improve, I guess, right? I mean, that's, nobody feels great about, certainly the issue that we're tackling with it, that was communicated well. I think what you're proposing, that's probably a little too ambitious. That's my gut feel when I, when I hear it, but, I think there are a lot of towns in Connecticut that either the town manager or the first selectman they do a monthly or a quarterly electronic newsletter that, they're tasked with highlighting the things that people need to know about, right? And, I don't think we're doing that here. I'm not sure. I'm not the best in the world, quite frankly, at trying to follow the happenings in town, to be honest, so. But that to me is something that can be done, relatively, pretty darn cost effectively.
And I know that Mark Raymond did do two podcasts, and it's my understanding that those can be transformed into a written document, written description, which could be, posted at the library, posted in several places throughout the town. So then,
Yeah, and I guess maybe where I came back to on my original comment was where I'm less concerned about the medium, and I'm more concerned about the content. And maybe what the recommendation is that goes to the council is to develop a policy of, similar to what you've laid out, Dan, here in this litigation piece, that has said, hey, you cross certain tripwires, certain things happen. Maybe from a communication perspective, we're saying like, hey, things that matter that financially or might be materially financial to the town, we gotta bring them up in a newsletter and tell people, good, bad, and ugly. But we sort of write a policy that says, hey, here's a big issue that, we wanna make sure gets included in this regular communication. It stands out from meeting minutes or just being buried on a website somewhere.
So, if I'm hearing right, obviously what I wrote out here is significantly more ambitious and maybe cost prohibitive for us to consider for the purposes of this committee. Even with the braided funding, which may make it not cost prohibitive, but that's an unknown. I'll acquiesce to that. What could be impactful is still a monthly format of a newsletter that, and that what would have to go in there, and from whom, and for why. And so a much more narrow scope than what I'm suggesting. I'm good being wrong.
Well, no, if you didn't bring up what you brought up, we would have come to where we are right now.
right,
Yep.
exactly.
Yep. Okay, so if I go back to, the items, that the scope of the content, which is item 2, that was really the thing that we're gonna wanna hone in on. And we could talk about it being an electronic newsletter, right? That is both posted as well as emailed to every resident whose email is on file, as well as a number of print copies made that can be posted in select locations around town, right?
Perhaps.
Right, does that, theoretically? Like the library or the,
The library, town hall.
yeah.
Senior center, good
Right.
point, yeah.
Yeah.
I think if we can flesh that out a little
Okay,
bit,
yeah.
that can be the recommendation.
All right. Okay.
All right, and then we had, adopting best practice for executive session, which again, I believe we did a much better job. The last executive session town council went into with really Dan again, I came up with a recommendation for standardizing executive session procedures.
Well, let's see if I
Wanna
can,
like-
yeah. Let's see if I can honor the great meatloaf and get 2 out of 3. So, all right, so, and this isn't inventing the wheel. Some of what Rich, you had shared with us, as well as doing a brief search of executive sessions and best practices around the country. And what we came up with is document provides a formal framework for how Watertown boards and commissions convene and conduct executive sessions in compliance with Connecticut law. The Watertown Home Rule Charter requires that town council sessions remain open to the public, and press except with closure is permitted by FOIA and other applicable laws. These recommendations are designed to ensure the town council and boards, such as the Water and Sewer Authority, follow the required procedures for entering an executive session, protect a legitimately sensitive town business, and uphold public trust. So the statutory framework for closure. Under Connecticut General Statute, public agencies in Watertown may only enter executive session under 5 discrete reasons, right? Personnel matters, litigation strategy, public security, real estate transactions, and exempt records, such as any matter which would result in the disclosure of public record exempt from FOIA. So procedural standards for convening sessions. To avoid legal challenges or the nullification of board action, the following procedural steps must be followed. 2/3 vote. An executive session may only be initiated by an affirmative vote of 2/3 of the members present and voting at a public meeting. Specificity of motion. The motion must identify the reason for the session with sufficient particularity. Vague descriptions such as personnel or legal matters are legally inadequate. A correct example would be, I move to enter executive session to discuss the performance evaluation of the town manager per Connecticut General Statute 1-206A. Prohibition on voting. No votes or formal actions may be taken during an executive session. All final decisions must occur in the public portion of the meeting. Attendance limits. Attendance is limited to board members and invited persons necessary to provide testimony or opinion. Invited guests must leave as soon as their testimony is concluded. Best practices for modern governance. The shift toward hybrid and digital meetings requires enhanced security and transparency protocols. Public comment standards. To maintain order, a standardized 3-minute limit for public comments is recommended as seen in other municipal frameworks. Electronic participation for hybrid meetings, roll call votes must be taken unless the vote is unanimous. Digital security, boards must ensure waiting room technology. Email communication, board members must avoid a reply all chain, right? Conclusion, adopting these recommendations will provide the town of Watertown with a defense against Freedom of Information Commission complaints, which can result in civil fines or the voiding of town contracts. By standardizing the particularity thank you, of motions and securing the life cycle of confidential documents, the town council and ancillary boards will ensure the Watertown remains a model. So it's fairly straightforward and simple, but I don't think we've had that structure in place previously. And so by implementing this, at least now, we can say this is what we're adhering to. When we go into executive session, we're gonna know why we're going in. We're gonna go in on a 2/3 vote. We're gonna come back publicly and make the votes. No decisions are made inside. I think that's what's happened, but formally, this will be the policy.
And that policy will have to be throughout all commissions, not just responsibilities of the relationship between WSA and town council, who has the final say, and we did go through, and Dan, that was a very nice letter you wrote to Mark, explaining that Mark Ramo, the town manager, is the administrative head of the water and sewer authority. But he does not set the rates, he cannot tell them what to do. The town council is is not, WSA is not subordinate to the town council.
Town manager.
No, town council.
Yes.
Yeah. But there is no clearly defined relationship for what happens if town council disagrees with WSA, which I think is where we are now.
Yeah, well, I mean, the way that I've always understood it, right, is, so, I mean, the charter is pretty clear in that WSA is a subordinate body, right? But WSA is the rate-setting body, right? And state statutes have set that up a long time ago, because the hope there was that the rate-setting process would get divorced from the political process as much as possible, right? Because they wanted to make sure that communities are setting rates at a place that allows the utility to invest properly and to pay its bills and fund its infrastructure, and to try to separate that from the, general tax mill rate setting, general fund setting process. And so that's why the state statutes are kind of set up that way, that the WSA has that authority. So it's intentionally done to try to provide a bit of autonomy to the WSA, right? And so to me, the check and balance there has always been your WSA members they have terms, and if the town council doesn't feel that the WSA member is acting in alignment with how they feel, then they would have, then they wouldn't be reappointed to a new term, right? And that's sort of your authority over that. So that's, I mean, to me, because and again, I'm not, probably do need an attorney to opine on it, but the state statutes do designate that you have to have a body that is in charge of rate setting. Now, you can have a town council. There are certain places in the state, like Torrington, for example, does not have a dedicated water sewer authority that does their sewer rates, right? The sewer system in Torrington is owned by the town of Torrington. They operate it. The town council acts as that body there, which the state statute allows you to do. But if you establish a separate, sewer or water authority, they are the rate setting body.
How long are the current terms?
They're 3-year terms and they're staggered.
3-year staggered terms? Is there any language, does town council have any, should the situation arise where they thought it was necessary to terminate a term early?
You could, only for cause.
Oh, for cause, that's what I'm saying.
For cause, but cause wouldn't be I disagree with town
Right,
council.
right,
Cause
no.
would be I can't carry out my duties or
Right,
something.
but if
Yeah.
legitimate cause, there is something in
Yeah.
place for that.
Which, Adam, is, your experience in the field is really valued in terms of that feedback, and that's consistent with what Town Manager Ramos shared at our last town council meeting, that there would be those kinds of mechanisms for the town council to exert authority over if we saw fit. And so that seems to me to be, especially hearing you kind of reinforce that with your experience, seems to me to be the most reasonable thing, especially with the logic of the need for separation to take the political piece out of the rate setting, right?
As much as possible.
Yeah. Now, I would think we'd want to impress upon the Water and Sewer Authority the imperative to set rates in a way that protects the town, right? Because that's really what we're talking about here. But if they choose not to, then we would have to look at those other options.
I think, and especially when the budget's presented, we can always ask them to go back and relook.
Sure.
And, you know, I don't know if it does anyone any good if we get into a war, for lack of a better, terrible word, a disagreement with WSA, between WSA and town council. But I also think if we ask WSA to present their budget, where they are to date, come to the town council meetings, and perhaps, you know, have the WSA meetings here, where there's more room for people to observe them, it's more comfortable. I don't know if WSA would, you know, be fond of that, but I think that would go a long way towards making this whole process more transparent. Maybe that is the recommendation, we do not ride roughshod on WSA, but we try and encourage more transparency, and we can always ask them to go back and relook at things. But if we can get it up to date every maybe 2 months, every month, where they stand to budget, where it's looking at for the rates, I think it would go a long way towards settling some of this.
Well, so if we're just talking about increased oversight effectively, then that would communicate the urgency from our perspective.
Okay. Thoughts?
I mean, I think the other thing that we could look at, I don't know, I mean, the WSA does not include any ex officio members of the town council as on there. There's no council liaison. Is there?
No. I don't know. Is one of us on? No.
No.
The answer is no.
The answer is no, right? So that, like, you know, in an effort of sort of collaboration, et cetera, you know, I don't think there's anything that would forbid that, you know, piece there.
Good point. Well, we can also attend the WSA meetings.
Yeah. But absolutely, but I think
Yeah.
even as a member, even as if you're an ex officio member of the board, you participate in executive session of WSA, right? Like sort of have not just public participation rights, but you can participate in the meeting, and so I think that's,
That's an idea.
you know, is something to consider there in terms of trying to provide some continuity.
I like that.
So when we're talking, so this is really in the vein of better defining the relationship between town council and WSA, having a town council member as ex officio member is one such thing, especially for this fiscal year, this year that we're in now and into next fiscal year, really increasing communication and oversight, right? As well, right? That's not necessarily a permanent, I wouldn't think we'd
No.
want to drag them here every month forever,
No.
right?
No.
So that's not necessarily changing the relationship,
True.
right?
But it's improving the communication between WSA and town council.
Well, it needs to be more than just communication, it needs to be oversight. And that's where I think if you're having scheduled reporting requirements, it doesn't have to be so egregious, but enough to where the town council's looking at what's going on.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Quarterly? Does that make sense to you, Joe?
I would think so.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, we put this in, I mentioned this when we were doing the management policy. And I said for WSA, you know, these semi-annually be reporting. So that's like a bare minimum, what we should be doing, but quarterly, obviously the more the better.
Right, especially
Especially
now.
because there's such a disconnect. And I think that's the problem with even with the taxpayers, there's such a disconnect, nobody really knows what's going on with WSA.
I mean, what's the current procedure for town council for financial oversight of the town? Is there a, you know, regular financial reporting that the council's getting in terms of budget to actual, and all of that kind of regular financial reports?
The department heads, I mean, and we're new.
Okay.
The department heads, we do report monthly, but I don't know if it's to budget necessarily, but it's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, and I bring that up just because I think where you can dovetail those kinds of activities with the other financial matters of the town.
Right.
You might as well.
Might as well.
We don't need to create make work kind of exercises where there's already some pieces in place, but, you know, the town manager is the administrative head of the WSA, it's a department of the town, even though the governance structure is a little different, it's a department of the town, so why, you know, couldn't you also roll that up into the other kind of financial and oversight reporting, the activities that the council's doing?
It's a great point.
Yeah.
It's a great point, because it's not, I mean, who says it's restricted to WSA?
Right.
Could be, you know,
Well,
any other department.
right, who knows what hasn't blown up that could, right?
Exactly, and we want to prevent that.
Yeah.
Right,
So,
right, we've had major snowstorms this winter, like, where's the DPW overtime budget? You know, sure, it is way over whatever was budgeted, but there should be mechanisms at which that kind of reporting is going to the town council, so they're aware, and I would think, you know, you try to roll in some WSA oversight into those kind of things.
So, and I'm thinking WSA board appointment process. What is the process by which members of the WSA board are appointed? And do we want to operationalize that? Do we want to look at that appointment process differently than we do other boards? Do we want to, be intentional about how we renew appointments on the board? Do we want to create a rubric around appointments? Not to make it harder, but to make it intentional.
Well, town council appoints, so.
Right.
I think we need to ask, town council that.
So maybe that should be part of our recommendation, to ask town council if they want to think about.
I think we should just ask them tonight,
Oh,
because I know someone's up for, appointment.
that's great.
So,
All right, perfect.
no time like the present.
Great.
Anything else at this point? So we've got litigation risk management policy. Adam and Jeff, we are going to take a look at that. We've got forecasting ability for budget matters, that was Adam. Executive sessions were pretty good. Litigation review, we talked about that. And we need to look at, we still need to look at, making recommendations around the relationship between WSA and town council based on what we were speaking about tonight, as well as informing the public.
Yep.
And what should be communicated and how.
The larger scope of informing the public, I think we hit on one of the strands, so we need to make.
Flesh it out.
Yeah,